Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, it's Susan Coffin here for Attitude Magazine and Attitude's ADHD Experts webinar series. Welcome to all of you joining us today, and please welcome with me Laurie Dupar, our guest expert today, who will be talking about how to solve the three biggest challenges of ADHD medication. Those challenges, familiar to all of us, are: is it the right medication? Is it the right dose? And is it being taken at the right time of day? Laurie is a huge resource for us. We're so grateful to have her. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner and a senior certified ADHD coach who works with ADHD clients of all ages, especially those who want to understand how their brain works, minimize their challenges, and get things done. She's the co-author and the editor of the best-selling series, The ADHD Awareness Book Project, and the author of the very popular book, Brain Surfing and Other 31 Awesome Qualities of ADHD. In addition to writing and coaching, Laurie has recently co-founded something very exciting. It's called the International ADHD Coach Training Center, IACT Center, where she's going to train and mentor emerging ADHD coaches. So for more information, please visit her website. It's www.coachingforadhd.com. So with that, let me turn it over to Laurie with my thanks again. Laurie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Susan. I am really looking forward to it. I'm a huge fan of Attitude, so it's always my pleasure to be able to come on and talk with you and to use you as a resource. So let me just start by saying just a little bit about what Susan already mentioned, is that I'm going to be talking about what I call the top 3 ADHD medication pitfalls and how parents can avoid them. And as Susan mentioned, if you're an adult, or if you're a parent, or even if you're a young person listening to this, because I always find it interesting that some young people actually listen in because they're like, I need to know what I'm taking and how it works and what's going on. Absolutely hang in there. This applies to whether you're a parent, the adult, or the student of any age and stage. So, and as Susan mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the three areas that I find over and over again when somebody comes to me or I'm working with them and they're saying, my medication, I'm taking it, doesn't work, or I've taken medication, it doesn't work. Typically what I have found is that there's 3 areas. If we look at these 3 areas, helps to very quickly hone in on what might be the problem or what hasn't been addressed. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, looking at those 3 pitfalls, areas that you might not have realized how taking medication or different ways to take the medication that might be working for you. And then I'm going to be offering you some tools that you actually can download that I have my clients use, have created for my clients to use about keeping track of their medications, and also some questions that I really feel any person who is prescribing medication should be able to answer for you. I find a lot of times that my clients will tell me that the people they expect to get the answers from, they're not. So having these questions and knowing what to ask and knowing that these are perfectly reasonable questions to ask a prescriber has really been really helpful for them. So we know from studies that stimulant medication, it works. It works 70 to 80% of the time with children. Studies on adults definitely show that it levels the playing field. And what happens, though, unfortunately, is that for people, it may or may not be working or working the way that we think it should. And sometimes we don't even know how medications are supposed to work or what am I supposed to be noticing that's different. And if you're following the slides along right now, I actually hadn't looked at this slide for a while. This is actually my adorable, he's a 23-year-old big Navy guy right now, but this is when he was very young, and this is when we were just realizing he had ADHD medication, or when he was diagnosed with ADHD. I had trouble trying to figure out what was supposed to work, what wasn't supposed to work, and I was the mental health professional. So it's one of the reasons that I'm always excited to be talking about ADHD medications, not only from the place of a professional, but also as a parent myself, and knowing the struggles of trying to find that right dose, knowing the struggles of not wanting to personally or for my child give them more medication than they needed, and also feeling like I didn't know anyone that had the answers. So the top 3 medication pitfalls are really, it has to do with the wrong medication, the pitfall of wrong medication, the pitfall of the wrong dose, and the pitfall of the wrong, what I call timing around medication. So it's pretty easy to remember just these three. Am I taking the wrong medication? Am I taking the wrong dose? It might be the right medication for you, but if the dose isn't right, then it's not going to be working as effectively. And am I taking it is the timing of me taking it working? Oftentimes we can take medication too early or too late, and we're not getting, again, the full benefit or maximum benefit from the medication. So now we're just going to talk about how we avoid these. How do we avoid these pitfalls? One of the first way we avoid them is actually to know, how do we know when medications are working? I'm always surprised how often I get the question, clients will come in to me and say, my doctor keeps asking me how the medications are working. I'm not really sure what to tell him. Or I think it is, but I'm not really sure, right? But what you will notice when your medication is working effectively or is working for you is that whether it's yourself, like I said, or a child or somebody that you love, you might be listening because someone that you love is taking medication, you're trying to figure these pieces out yourself, is that you have a sustained focus. You're able to hold your attention on something that you want to without being distracted. That's not talking about hyper-focus or zombie focus. We're just talking about sustained focus. You're able to perhaps get paperwork done. You're able to finish making the bed in the bedroom before you're, down the hall and, cleaning out the cat litter. You're able to feel, and what happens when we're able to do that is we feel more productive. More things are getting done as a result of that sustained focus. There's less impulsivity of actions, so physical impulsivity. Also in thoughts, the thoughts in your head will stop sort of swirling. They actually settle down. A lot of people actually sleep when they're on their ADHD medications because it settles their brain down. They feel calm. Also, it will help, you'll feel less emotionality. A lot of folks will tell me, when I take my ADHD medication, it helps with my focus, but the anxiety goes away. There's also going to be less verbal impulsivity, perhaps the need to interrupt somebody or blurt out an answer, that sort of thing. People typically also have an improved mood. They feel better. Maybe it's because now they're getting things done because they're able to sustain focus. They're able to grab the thoughts that they want in their head and act upon them. And they oftentimes have less anxiety. Notice details are noticed. Sometimes this is a good and a bad thing because it's a great thing when, for instance, we might be doing a spreadsheet or, for instance, a student is doing their math homework. And part of the challenge is that we just miss the details. We might go over one extra block and put the answer in the wrong, square, or we forgot that particular step in an assignment or a project that we had to do. Typically, people will start to notice details, but they'll also start to notice details in their environment that they never had before. For instance, it's not uncommon for people to tell me that, I really never noticed that pile of stuff that's in my garage, all those boxes. I know I've been walking through there all the time, but I never really noticed them, and now they're kind of bothering me. People may also say they will notice things about individuals in their environment. I never really realized how loud my wife was when she was getting ready in the morning. So noticing details. You're able to filter out distractions of internal thoughts, being able to let those go. They don't stay swirling in your head. Emotions don't build up or explode, or there's not that implosion that happens sometimes. And you're able to filter out some of those, what would be otherwise distracting external environmental things, such as maybe that noise from that fan that always drives you crazy, or, for instance, somebody chewing next to you, which would drive you insane. Now you're able to sort of filter that out and put your attention someplace else. People say that they experience increased memory. They remember things. I have a client I worked with once who wanted to write a book. She was in the second half of her life, and she wanted to write this book. And the reason she started working with me was because she couldn't remember from one day to the next what she'd written. So she'd have to go back and reread the previous chapter before she could start writing again. And she felt incredibly unproductive. She felt like she was wasting a lot of time. She wanted to get through this, and working together with her psychiatrist, she actually lived in another state that I was in, I remember the day when she came on the call. I was checking in with her, and she said, "Oh my goodness, I can remember what I wrote yesterday. I don't have to go back and spend that hour rereading that. I can hop right in here and write the next chapter." And it was such an amazing feeling for her. So she remembers what happened. Learning is increased because, again, learning is about memory. People sleep better, which may surprise you because typically the last thing that a prescriber says as you head out the door is make sure you're getting enough to eat and make sure you're sleeping. Well, the fact is that, and a lot of people mistakenly think that the medication, once they start taking it, is interfering with, perhaps, especially parents notice this, with their child's sleep, because now they're asking the child, "So how are you sleeping? How are you sleeping?" And in fact, the child never was sleeping well, but now they're just being asked about it because they didn't realize, oh wow, people really fall asleep, and that about 15 minutes of their head hitting the pillow. They didn't know that there was any other way to do it. So typically people are going to be sleeping better, and again, improved mood. They just feel more motivated. So if you are not noticing these types of improvements in yourself, and you can apply that to yourself or a student or as an adult, this is medication working well for you. So let's go over some of those pitfalls. I mentioned the first one was the wrong medication. Interestingly, with ADHD medication, there's not a huge choice of medications. Ever since 1937, when they first started using, I think it was methylphenidate, then for the symptoms of ADHD, we really haven't had a lot of new substances or new core formulations of medications that have differed. We have the methylphenidates, which are like Ritalin and Concerta. If you're following along on your slide, you'll see these. That's also written down for you, Daytrona, Quilvent. There's also the amphetamine category, things like Dexedrine, Adderall, and Vyvanse. There's also what I call, so your stimulant category, we have two different kinds of stimulants in that category, methylphenidates and amphetamines. And then you have what I call your non-stimulants category, which is medications like Strattera or Wellbutrin or Effexor. Also, I include under this the non-stimulant categories, what we call Tenix or the clonidine. So what can be happening is that you might be taking the wrong medication. So if you're not experiencing some of the benefits of the medication, like you saw on that previous slide, feeling better, your thoughts getting clearer, noticing details, feeling more motivated, feeling more productive, it may be that you're on the wrong medication. And a lot of people don't even realize after taking one medication, they will come to me and say, I took medication, but it didn't work. So I guess I need to try something else. They have no idea, just even looking at the, 15, 20 medications that I have on the slide here, that there are other options for them. So it may be if they're taking something in the non-stimulant category, that was where they started taking medications. For instance, doctor started them on Strattera. It may be that that's not working for them. They're not noticing those characteristics of when their medication is working well, like sleeping better, like feeling more productive. They may need to actually try, or be worth trying for them, a stimulant medication, or vice versa. The other thing is to know that if you tried one of the stimulant medications, if you haven't tried both categories of stimulant medications, if you haven't tried methylphenidates and amphetamines categories, you still haven't tried sort of the whole gamut of options for yourself. So it can absolutely be the wrong medication. And wrong medication would be that you don't feel those benefits that we talked about. You're not feeling more productive. You're not feeling like you're getting things done. You're not sleeping well. It may also be that there are some side effects that are feeling uncomfortable. So that is typically the way people know, okay, this is not the right medication. Most people know that pretty intuitively. And if you don't, that is one of the things you need to ask your prescriber about and say, what side effect do I need to be asking you about? What do I call you about? What do I need to be watching for? But wrong medication, and know that there are multiple medications that are available. If you've tried one, you haven't tried ADHD medication, you've just tried that particular one. The wrong dose. It could be that you're on the right medication, for instance. Let's just use the example of Concerta, for instance. You're taking the right medication. The Concerta seems to work, but when you look at that list of, gosh, I'm still feeling like it's not quite enough. That's typical what people will say. Or I take it, but then in the afternoon when I'm coming home to my family, I just get really, really anxious. There's lots of activity and stuff going on. And I just want to retreat in my room sort of calm it all down. I don't really get a chance to enjoy being with them because it seems like my medication is wearing off. Or it might be, my child really does well at school. The medication seems to be working then, but then they come home and they sit to do homework and it's just a disaster. We're spending 5 hours sitting down trying to do it. So what might be happening then is it's the wrong dose. And it could be that it's too much, or too little. It could be too little or it could be too much. There's a recommended dosage that prescribers use, but it's not uncommon for some people to need what we would call a subtherapeutic dose, but get the same benefits. What we're looking at is the benefits that you get from the medication. And some people actually need a higher than recommended dose, just the way that their body works. So it could be starting and or staying on a dose that's too low for them. It could be starting at too high a dose. Most prescribers are going to start on a low dose and move it up slowly. That's what I would expect. That's if they were doing anything else, it would seem odd to me. But sometimes, even when they start on the low dose, it's too much for them. They need to actually take half of that capsule or half of that tablet. Staying on the same dose too long is also a problem. So again, it's the wrong dose. They've stayed on the dose for years and haven't really stopped and thought, okay, how is this working for me? Am I able to get things done? Am I feeling productive? Our brains change over the course of a lifetime, and depending on, and also can change depending on a lot of the development of the brain can also change due to hormone changes. So if you're finding that you've been on a medication and it's not providing the same benefit that you've experienced at one time, or your child's on a medication, it's not providing the same benefit, maybe take a look at changing the dose. Oftentimes people may be on the wrong dose because it's being interfered with by other substances or other influences. It's very common, people with ADHD, because their brains are so busy, even if they're on a medication, but if it's not high enough, they may be drinking a lot of alcohol to calm their brain down. Pot is certainly a substance that people use to calm their brain down. Caffeine is another substance people will oftentimes self-medicating to try and get that dopamine going in their brain. But it's interfering with the right dose of the medication. I was working with a gentleman once who came up to me after a talk and said, I'm not really sure my medication's working right. I think he was like 40 milligrams of Adderall or something, which is an average dose. It's certainly not the highest dose. And he said, but I'm drinking about 8 shots of espresso a day. And I thought, oh my goodness. First, as a nurse, I'm thinking, what does your stomach look like, right? Then I wondered how did he pay for it? Because I know I go through Starbucks once a week and it's expensive for me. But he was drinking so much caffeine to try and get that effectiveness, trying to add that sort of boost to his day. His medication was too low. That's why he was trying to supplement with it. A lot of people will stop taking medication, so basically wrong dose is no dose, due to the misinformation of what a normal side effect is. It's very common that I find prescribers don't necessarily talk to their patients about, especially with stimulants, what happens when the medications wear out of your system. And we call it rebound. It sounds terrible, but it's no different than when, for instance, when you drink a cup of coffee or you have sugar and your body sort of gets excited for a while, but then as it wears out of your system, you sort of feel that lull. That's very common with these medications, and it can be uncomfortable for a lot of folks. It's when the medication is wearing off. But there are absolutely things that you can do for that to help it not, drop off so quickly that it feels uncomfortable. People oftentimes notice that they become anxious or agitated or hungry or grumpy, right, when their medication's wearing off, if it's a stimulant medication. Also, there can be a dosage challenge if it's generic. If you go from the brand to generic, doesn't mean that the generic is worse, but according to the generic can differ from the brand by about 25%. That's legal for it to do it, how they make it. So if you have been taking a certain brand of a medication, and now because of your insurance or the pharmacy that you go to, now you're taking a generic form of that, you may not notice anything different. That's great. But if you do, it may be because there's just that little bit of difference that happened from you going from the brand to the generic. It also can happen when you're going from generic to generic. There's a lot of different companies, for instance, that make the methylphenidate. And like I said, there's allowed a 25% difference between the generics and the brand for it to be considered to be approved. So if you have changed from brand to generic, or you notice, gosh, okay, my generic, that was working fine, but now I'm noticing that my pill's green and not yellow like it was last week, ask your pharmacy. It may be that for you, you need that one particular type of generic medication, because the dosage can change. 25% is a big shift for a lot of folks. Wrong time, taking it too early or too late. Wrong time is the third pitfall. Taking it too early or too late. Taking it too early, meaning it wears off before you want it to. Taking it too late may mean you're taking it right as you head out of the door, for instance, in the morning. But what happens is that the whole morning was a disaster. Just think about it, right? That morning time is a huge planning time for a lot of us to get ready for the day, to get organized. It sets that pace, sets that tone for the day. We're taking the medication late, meaning as we're heading out the door. And I know I can hear people out there saying, oh my gosh, my mornings are crazy, right? It may be that you're taking it too late. Taking it only once a day. I'm surprised at how many prescribers don't talk with their clients about you can actually take medications more than once. And you can combine different medications. So if you're only taking it once a day and you're not experiencing those benefits that I mentioned, being more focused, feeling more productive, getting better sleep, feeling less anxious, you may need to talk with your prescriber about adding a dose in there somewhere. Taking it inconsistently was one of the biggest challenges for people with ADHD, forgetting, running out, or what I call PMS. And that's not what you might typically think it is. I call it prescription medication syndrome, because it's that 30-day window that we have where inevitably there's probably 2 or 3 days in the month that if we're having to refill our medications, it takes, I don't know how many people it takes to get these medications filled, but it's a crazy system for us with ADHD. But there's oftentimes a gap between taking the medications and getting the next prescription refilled. And I hear this over and over and over again, and it requires us to be organized and planned and think ahead, which is exactly what the challenge is. And so there's certain days in the month that we just won't have our medication with us. So I call that prescription medication syndrome. Medication vacations, again, research is showing that really consistency of taking the medication, even over weekends, tends to have the best result. Your brain doesn't have to readjust to it on Monday, so to speak. However, I also know that people choose to do medication vacations, meaning not taking the medication during perhaps over the holidays or over the summer or breaks or things like that. And again, I think that's at this point still a really personal question, but research is certainly showing that the more consistently you take the medication, the better results you're going to have, because now your brain is able to be engaged during all of those particular periods of time. Sometimes the wrong timings that people discontinue too soon. And I see this, unfortunately, because they are experiencing some side effects. They haven't experienced the benefit that would be ideal for them. And so they just stop, or they don't think that there's any other options for them. So ways to avoid these pitfalls is what I call a medication reminder system. Like I said, that's the hardest thing for us with ADHD to do, is to remember to take our medications. I know there's a lot of fear around addiction with these medications, but literally the whole fact that we can't remember to take our medications is sort of the anti-definition of addiction. We might take medication in the morning. We think, okay, now I got to remember to take my medication at 2:00 in the afternoon, and all of a sudden it's 4 and we're like, dang, I forgot, didn't take that medication. Finding a way to remember to take it is the biggest hurdle I find for most folks. I'm going to talk with you and show you what I've created a medication log, how you can keep track of the dose of medication you're taking, and also some sort of key symptoms or key behaviors so you can actually have a way of keeping track of, is it working, is it not? How long is the medication working? that's another key piece of this when it comes to the timing. Most people don't know how, when they take the medication, when does it kick in? When do they notice it? That's an important thing, because then it'll give you some information as to, do I need to take it earlier so that when I hit first period, which is English, and I hate to write papers, my brain's a little more geared in. And when does it wear off? I can't tell you how many individuals I've worked with where I'll work with a family or a student, and I'll talk with them about their day, and they'll say, yeah, it's in science or whatever is when things get difficult. And I'll ask them, and as we talk about it, I'll realize based on other input from family and from the student that medication isn't lasting the whole day for them. It might say that on the doctor's medication formulary. It might say, hey, this medication is supposed to last 8 or 10 hours, but in reality, it's only lasting 6 for that child. So it's wearing off before school has ended, and it's why they're struggling through those last 2 periods of the day. So I'm going to give you a tool to keep track of that, so you can actually take this to your prescriber and say, hey, I like to call this my medication log, but it's really sort of this communication like between you and your prescriber, because they understand what this information means. Helps you as well. And then I'm not going to go through the 13 questions to ask your prescriber about ADHD medications, but I am going to give you a link where you can get those questions. As I said at the beginning of this, at the top of the hour, that these are questions that when I am choosing a prescriber, or when I was choosing a prescriber for my son, I felt my prescriber should know these answers. They're things like asking the prescriber, is this a stimulant? Is this a non-stimulant? How long should this medication last? Do I take it with food? Do I not? A let's wait and see approach from a prescriber is not good enough. I want to know that they have the answers. And you have a right to have the answers to them. So I'll give you a list of questions that you can use when you're talking to your prescriber, or maybe if you're looking for a prescriber for yourself. So again, medication reminder system, I just have a picture here of, it could be pill cases, it could be alarms, calendars, it could be backpacks, wallets, something that helps you remind you to take your medication. I had a 10-year-old I worked with once who, for some reason, was responsible for taking his medications, which I thought was sort of young, but it was a system he worked out with his family. And I asked him, how did he remember to take his medication in the morning? And he goes, well, Coach Laurie, what I do is before I go to bed at night, when I'm getting ready for bed and I close my door, I take one of my pillows and I throw it at the back of the door. I'm listening, right? Thinking, okay, I'm waiting for how I take my medication part. He says, so that when I get up in the morning, because I won't remember to take my medication, but I will wonder why my pillow's up against my door. And he said, then I'll remember to take my medication. So just an example. Whatever creative way you need to do it, perfect. The medication log, there's a picture of it here on your screen, and also where you can download that. If you go to, you can see it, it's http://www.iactcenter.medication log/. It's there. You can get copies of it, and I'm sure that Susan will mention it again. But you can keep track of it. You can print out as many copies as you want, keep track of the dose, what time did I take it, what time did it wear off, how's my memory doing. It gives you a place to rate those things, your motivation, your appetite, how am I sleeping, all those kinds of things. It's a wonderful tool. My clients love it. And then just to wrap up, I said that you will also be able to download these key questions to ask your prescriber when taking ADHD medications. These are questions I would expect my prescriber, my doctor, to be able to answer for me. And if it's written a little bit addressing it, so if you were a parent, you could just change that language if you were an adult. But they should be able to tell you, when is my next appointment? If it's not working, if my medication isn't working for me, how do I get a hold of you? How do I get a hold of you to have the medication changed? Are there side effects I need to be aware of? Are there any health checks that need to be done? How does this medication work in my brain? We should be able to tell you that. This is what it does. So I hope in this last 30 minutes, which is a pretty brief amount of time, that at least what I'm giving you are some resources and also some very simple ways to start to discern, is my medication working for me? And if it's not, is it because I'm on the wrong medication and I need to explore with my prescriber a different medication? Or am I just not on the right dose of the medication? Do I need to increase the dose and see if that makes a difference? Or do I need to decrease the dose and see if it makes a difference? And the last one, am I taking it at the right time so that it works the most effectively for me? With your stimulant medication, most of us know that it works. You just take it that day, it works, and then it wears out of your system over a certain length of time, usually within a 24-hour period, typically less, but it works and then wears off that day. What most people don't realize is that the non-stimulant medications actually can take about 6 weeks to build up into your body. And I just have to say that because I'm surprised. I see this a lot more when clients will come to me and say, I was taking a stimulant medication, it just didn't seem to be working for me. Now I'm taking a non-stimulant, for instance, they may be trying Statera, but they said, I don't really notice anything that's different. And they may not, because that medication has to build up in their system. They have to take it every day for at least 4 to 6 weeks for that blood level of that medication to work up in your system, and then to start adjusting the dosages. So I say that because I know how oftentimes that is not a piece of information that's shared with clients of mine. So wrong medication, wrong dose, wrong time. Very simple. Use the medication log to keep track of it, so that when you go and talk to your doctor, you can say, hey, this is what I'm taking. This is how it's working. This is what's not working about it. Gives them the information that they need. You're speaking the same language again. And if you still are not really quite comfortable with your prescriber that you have, these are questions you might want to ask them that I've given you.
Laurie, these are great resources. Thanks so much. Are you ready to take questions?
I am ready.
Okay. We got tons of good questions here. I'm thinking as I read them, perhaps I'll just pose them to you first, the general questions about medication. Then there's some specific questions about sort of following your pattern about whether to change a medication. And then there are a set of questions about side effects. So why don't I do them in that order?
Sure.
On the general issue of ADHD medications, do they affect appetite? Or is that a dosage issue? Do we know?
Yeah, some of this, both. Okay. They can affect appetite. Some people, each medication seems to be different per person, honestly. For some people, it really affects their appetite. For some people, it doesn't. Okay. And it can be dose related as well. Some people may notice that doesn't seem to affect their appetite until they reach a certain dose. And typically what people are worried about with regards to appetite, most adults don't worry about that. They're like, yeah, great, right? Some people are worried that they're not getting the nutrition they need, but I don't typically hear that from adults. But oftentimes, right, we want to make sure our children are getting the nutrients they need to develop and grow in a normal rate. That's a whole other topic, but how to make sure that your child is getting the nutrition that they need to work around their medications. And it may include, certainly includes making sure that they are eating a really high protein breakfast in the morning, maybe before they take their medication, that what they have with them during the day is some sort of anything that they have available to eat, even if they may not want to eat it, is pure sort of protein, because that's going to be the longest fuel source for them. And I know when my son was young, I didn't care if it was covered in chocolate, as long as it was protein inside there, he would eat it, right? And then oftentimes these kids will eat dinner later as their medication wears off. So it doesn't mean they don't sit down to dinner with you and enjoy that family time with you, but it may mean that their meal needs to be reheated up or be served at a later time when the medications wear off. So it's a different sort of eating pattern, but that's typically what I find when people are concerned, because I know there's a lot of parents that their children are on the slender side, and it's a really legitimate concern for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another general question that's of interest that more than one person has asked. For people who drink alcohol, or in one case smoke weed, is there an interaction that they need to be concerned about when taking ADHD medications?
Yeah, there is, because any medication you take is going to counteract with the other one. So when you're taking a stimulant, something to increase certain neurotransmitters in your brain, when you smoke pot or drink alcohol, it has the opposite effect. So that's why I include it when we talk about dosages, because if you stopped drinking, stop pot, stop smoking, for instance, it's going to probably cause you to experience your ADHD medications differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another thing to track as you're using your medication.
I think it is something to track, to notice.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And I think you touched on this, but someone asked whether he would be taking this for the rest of his life. And two issues there. Is it addictive? And B, is there a time when, or alternatively, is there a time when you transition off of medication?
Okay. So I love that question, by the way. I'm trying to think how to answer this. Will you, if you start these medications, will you be taking them for the rest of your life?
Right.
It's sort of this odd situation we're in with actually our ADHD medications. For whatever reason, it seems that they are optional. I don't know why that is, but they are in this sort of, I don't think they're optional. I think this is a medical condition. There's a certain neurotransmitter that we're trying to increase, and when we do, people typically, those symptoms diminish. Having said that, at any time, people can stop taking their medications. They can. Nobody's going to tell them legally they have to. What I typically find is that at certain periods in people's lives, that they do tend to use the medication differently. What I mean by that is that as a student, typically a student's day, and I also include the occupation of teachers because they have the same sort of schedule, and even moms actually, is that your day goes from the morning you get up to when you go to bed, right? Whether you're in school, whether you're trying to pay attention, whether you're trying to do homework, whatever it is. So students do tend to take a medication that's longer acting. What I find with adults is especially if they're in a job that they really enjoy, that they do well, but there's maybe a few pieces of it, maybe it's the paperwork day they have to do or something like that, that they tend to go to more of the short acting medications and then just take the medication when they need it.
Right.
For instance, professors who absolutely loves getting up in front of a class and teaching, they feel like that's one of their brilliances, and they don't need medication to do that. But when they're planning it and trying to organize how it's going to be presented, they may take a short-acting medication to help them in that preparation work.
That's interesting, right? Mm-hmm. So the school day for children is long, and this sort of long acting makes some sense. And then as adults, maybe you manage it, and then you sort of say, okay, I'm going to need help here and there. It's interesting.
And the whole addictive piece of it, and people with ADHD are not the ones that are typically abusing the medications. And like I said, just my experience, Susan, has been that I rarely have someone that is taking their medication consistently because they forget. And forgetting the medication to take something is, like I said, the anti-definition of an addiction.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
That's the biggest problem that I have.
Right.
Does your brain get used to working at that particular level? Yeah. But that's different than being addicted to something.
Right. It's interesting because, we're always concerned about addiction and yet you're talking about people forgetting to take the medication. And one of the questioners is saying, what do you do in a situation in which a person is reluctant to take the medication despite obvious benefits? I guess this is a spouse or a child. And I think we've all seen that example, right? I mean, that's pretty common.
With someone not wanting to take the medication.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a tough one. And especially if it's, a parent. And I've worked with students as young as 10 years. Students typically, part of this is their growth and development pattern, they're trying to figure out who they are. And especially students that have been diagnosed earlier on and start medication will oftentimes go through a period in their adolescence that they are wondering, who am I? I don't know who I am without this medication. So it's very common that they want to stop taking the medication. It may also be students that are diagnosed at first in perhaps this adolescence period, especially high school, it seems to be, may be reluctant to take the medication because they don't want to be different than their peers, or they think it somehow gives them extra, it's not even necessarily they want to be seen different. It may give them more an advantage, and they don't feel that that's fair. So they don't want to start taking the medication.
Right.
But even students as young as 10, I had this one young man I was working with who, really bright little guy, and was taking his medication, and then something changed. There's real noticeable difference in what was going on at home, what was going on in school. And when I was working with him and coaching him, I just asked him, what's going on? I'm noticing all these things. And what happened is that he hadn't told anyone, but he had started to what we call cheat the medication, right? He started to not take it, and it was actually spitting it out somewhere. I don't know where it was, because even at that young age, he was feeling some pressure that he didn't want to be different than his peers. He didn't want to seem to have an advantage that his peers didn't. Usually when I'm working with a teen or a student like that, because they're not going to take it if they don't want to. They're going to do something just like I described, of taking it out or putting it somewhere, and parents may think they're taking it. So I like to work with them and ask them, and sort of in an experimental form, I'll say to them, okay, I totally understand that you're not wanting to take the medication. You're wanting to know what it's like to not be on the medication. How will you know if that's working for you? How will you know if this is the direction you want to go, and how long do you want to try this? Really work with them about looking at it sort of like an experiment, just to see, okay, let's try this and see what happens. Well,
that's a great suggestion.
What's that?
Great suggestion. Right. Rather than trying to talk them into it. Yeah, rather than trying to talk them into it, sort of saying, why don't you try it on or off and make your judgment or something like that. Yeah. That's a great idea. There are a couple of parents who posted to underscore what you said, that their children are upset, that there's something wrong with them, that they have to take this, or wanting to know really how do they talk to their children about this without making them feel some sort of stigma or shame about taking medication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of this, Susan, is definitely, or the answer would be, there's part of it has to do with the age of the child.
Right.
So that would be easier to answer it. In general, I really take just a pretty upfront approach. I'm always very curious when I'm working with a student, whether it was my four growing up or a lot of the students that I work with, is just ask them what they know. Mm-hmm. Start from that place, what they know, because oftentimes what's happened, especially if they're younger and they're sort of going through this, like this young 10-year-old I was working with, there was some misinformation that he was getting. And he didn't have anybody to sort of offer another perspective for him. So he was reacting just from that sort of that perspective. The other is, I'm trying to see how to say this. I oftentimes find that students who are reluctant to take medication, typically there's someone in their environment. It could be a peer, it could be a parent, it could be a relative that is very reluctant for them to take the medication. There's somebody in that child's world that is, they're getting a mixed message.
Right.
And
All right. Well, those are some interesting background questions. I'm going to turn now to the questions about which medication, which is a very tough one. A couple of questions there. A person's having some OCD sort of, symptoms with Concerta. Does that mean that he should try something in the amphetamine class? I think, is it correct, Laurie, that some people respond to amphetamines and others respond better to methylphenidates?
Yes.
So,
I actually say some people are methylphenidate responders and some people are amphetamine responders, meaning that they tend to react more positively to the one than the other. And it's really hard to tell which you are unless you've tried both. So if someone's on Concerta and they're experiencing some OCD, which can oftentimes be, some people will say they are hyper-focused, meaning they can't even switch their attention, or they may notice they're picking on things. Do you know what I mean? They're picking at things. If that's just started and a dose has just been changed, I would look at that. Perhaps it's going back to the previous dose if that wasn't there. if they did just start concerned and notice these, and that would probably an option for them would be to go and try one of the amphetamines like Adderall.
Okay.
And I can already hear, Susan, there are people out there saying that's the same reaction I had to Adderall, and that's true.
Right. So it could be either one. Right.
It could be either one, but oftentimes I find that it's one or the other for people. That they have, some people don't have any sort of uncomfortable side effects with either of the medication. But if this person is having some of this more picking kind of OCD or hyper-focus where they can't even switch their attention, you might want to go back to your prescriber and say, hey, you know what, I might be in the right category, but I need to try another subtype of medication.
Okay. And then I think I've heard, and tell me if this is right, that some percentage of people, I forget, maybe 20-25%, don't respond to either, which doesn't mean that they don't have attention deficit disorder, but that they just don't respond to either medication. Is that?
I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I think I've heard something that's a little bit less. Typically, when people, rarely I will find someone that has really gone through the process of trying different medications, looking at is it the right medication, is it the right dose, is it the right timing. Yep. Typically, it's one of those, honestly.
Okay, and that makes sense. Yeah,
it's not that they can't take medications at all, but those particular areas weren't addressed as they were going through each of those medications. There certainly are individuals that just have a very unique system that never seem to find a medication, even looking at all those that works. But I've rarely found that, honestly.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. It's just so difficult to titrate every medication and work through it that probably hard for people to actually do that correctly.
It is.
Especially it's so little support out there. Very little
support. It takes some persistence to do it. You need the support of people around you. And, if we're talking about parents here, parents are really, Susan, in a really tough situation. If they start medication right away with their child, they're wrong because they didn't try other ways, for instance, like coaching. But if they don't start medication and their child is struggling, they're wrong. So they're really in a really awful predicament. Darn if they do, darn if they don't. So it is super important. It's one of the reasons I include those questions so that they find that support in their prescriber. And hopefully other people around them that sort of get that this is a bit of a trial and error until we find the right dose and the right medication. It's not common that it's the first one you try is the one that people that they stay with or works the best for them.
And there's a big demand, because I can see it in the questions here, for some sort of magic to help you know which medication. One person asked, is there a blood test that'll tell you whether it's effective? And then a couple of people have asked about advertising they've seen for, cheek swabs or something that will help you determine some sort of DNA testing, apparently, that'll help you determine.
There are. I think there is something out there like that. I just saw it at the CHAD conferences last week. What it does is it looks at certain genetic markers that will tell you basically which category might work, but what it's not going to tell you. So it gives you a little bit more direction, or it could give you more direction based on this, but it's not going to tell you which exact medication, and it's not going to tell you the dose, and it's not going to tell you the timing of the medication. So you still have to figure that out. For some people, it's helpful if it even just eliminates one particular category of medication, and it says genetically this is not this has been not the one you should be taking. That could be helpful, but you still go back to those, like I said, those pitfalls where still doesn't tell you which medication you need to be taking, which is going to work the best for you, what the timing you need, how to take that in a timing manner, and the dose.
Right, that's tough. Yeah, those are the tough.
It is. Yeah.
Questions here about combining a stimulant medication with another medication. One person asked about combining a stimulant with Strattera or another non-stimulant, and someone else's child is let me find this question, is being given, I think, one of the anti-seizure medications as well. So
Yeah.
What about?
Yeah, it's very common that the medications can be combined or are combined, and they can be combined.
Okay.
Now, give a little example of this, especially with the stimulant medications. What they are activating in the brain is dopamine. That's the only neurotransmitter that they're activating. They're activating dopamine. And if you think about it, the brain is just another organ of the body, right? For whatever reason, dopamine for people with ADHD is just not working. There's not enough, or it's not working efficiently enough, right? That it's probably pretty true that there's maybe some other neurotransmitters in our brain, if we have this genetic makeup, that maybe are not also doing sort of up to par work, is that how I like to call it. And I have that genetic makeup, right? So a lot of times they may be experiencing what we call coexisting conditions with the ADHD. And the medications to treat those actually treat those other neurotransmitters. And they typically are addressing things like norepinephrine and or serotonin. So it's very common. Like Strattera basically is a remake of an old antidepressant. It's been cleaned up, it's been modernized, so to speak, but it doesn't actually, a lot of times people take that because it primarily activates the norepinephrine and the serotonin, along with a stimulant medication which activates the dopamine. But they sort of stay in their own little lane, if I can say that. They only activate their own particular neurotransmitter. So that's why they can be combined.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, they actually work differently and sort of to create
parts of the brain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A couple of questions about sleep. Oh, the perennial problem for people with ADHD. This is a teacher, I think, who's asking, who has a child who's very hyperactive, but also comes to school terribly exhausted because they can't sleep. And she's asking whether taking a stimulant will exacerbate the sleep problem. And then another person is saying that her son takes Adderall in the morning and then a small dose right upon leaving school to get through the evening, and with clearly beneficial effects. However, he still has lots of problems sleeping, takes melatonin, wakes up, has lots of problems, hungry, or feeling like he needs to eat when he wakes up. So how does sleep problems, which are sort of intrinsic to having ADHD, how do they fit or not fit with stimulant medications?
Yeah, it really is. And like I said, one of the first things that when a parent comes, or when they're concerned, because like I said, they're sent from the doctor's office and told, be sure they're sleeping. So now we start asking questions of our students. Are you sleeping? How did you sleep? How long did you sleep? Did you wake up? These are things that these students typically haven't ever been asked. And an example that I give is my own son. I would go in there when I was changing his sheets when he was young, and he had a bunk bed with his brother, and I would look and I would see like little tears of like wallpaper pulled off, and he'd had a pen and he was writing. I'm like, what is he doing?
What's going on?
I realized he wasn't sleeping, right? But he wasn't the child that got up and said, I'm not sleeping, because he didn't know that everybody else was.
Right.
So it's really important to find out from your student, if you're a parent and you're starting to know this, were they having this before they started the medication? Oftentimes they are, just nobody asked them about that.
Right.
Also, one of the benefits of doing this medication log, Susan, is that start to track when he or she take the medication and when it wears off. If it's wearing off 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, it's probably not the medication that's keeping them awake at that time.
Yeah.
And the one reader was saying some people actually take their medication, a small dose of their medication, to fall asleep because it actually calms their brain down.
I have read that, yes.
Yeah. If a student's showing up tired, and again, it depends on the age group. A lot of teens and a lot of people are up late at night because sometimes it's the only time that they can do certain things. So they're up late at night, and they may be then showing up to school tired. Another thing is that the medication, especially Strattera, can create a lot of sleepiness for some individuals. So
there are some people here who have said that.
So if it is, you can take that Strattera at night, which it will help that person get to sleep rather than keeping them asleep during the day, because it works different than the stimulants. There's another question that was asked. A lot of people if it is, and a lot of people actually say it's just boring sleeping. They have a really hard time sleeping, right?
I'm in that category. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They have a really hard time sleeping. So there's all different kinds of techniques to do if really what's happening is they're just awake. But typically that's because their brain is really busy. It might be having a conversation with them before they go to sleep, sort of to let them do a brain dump if it's a parent or even a spouse, giving them something to write on so when they wake up they have a note there so they won't forget it. Is typically we're trying to remember everything in our brain right before we go to sleep. Again, make sure with the timing of the medication that it's not bumping right up to the bedtime hour, and even consider the fact that someone may actually benefit from a small dose of medication. The question about, and I want to clarify this, the question about taking a stimulant for a hyperactive child, would it make them hyperactive, is really a very common perception of what's happening with the medication. Yeah. It's why people who are hyperactive, when they take a stimulant, calm down, because now their brain is getting what it needs. The movement, the physical movement and hyperactivity that's happening is because the person's trying to get the dopamine in their brain to work. Moving around, being restless, fidgeting is trying to activate that dopamine. It's why once they take medication, it seems like they calm down. Actually, they do, because they no longer have to physically try and get that dopamine to work in their brain. The brain now is producing it, and it's more efficiently being utilized in the brain. So it's a really big misconception that why would we give a stimulant to someone who's hyperactive? Well, stimulant's just the name of the category of medication, but it's stimulating the dopamine in the brain so the person doesn't have to move around to try and get that going.
That makes sense. Yeah, we use the word stimulant as if it's going to stimulate activity, right? Yeah. We're running out of time. So many good questions. So one last one, I guess. Unfortunately, every medication that we've tried, this person says, my daughter's personality changes. When she's not on her med, she's funny, loving, and when she's on her med, she's tired, grumpy. And how do I figure out if it's the wrong medication or the wrong dose? So there you have it, right there. Yeah.
A lot of times there's a concern that it changes their personality, and oftentimes, if we think about this, and it may not be the right medication for her. However, if you think about really what's happening in the brain when we take medications for ADHD, and what we're seeing when the medication is not working in their brain, is there's a lot of impulsivity, spontaneity, sort of just saying things, off the top of our head, that oftentimes it's a lot of fun to do that. And we look at that as primarily what we perhaps think is someone's personality, when in fact part of it is the ADHD. So when individuals take the medication and now their whole brain can work, that part of their brain that says, wait, stop, think, pause, maybe you don't want to say that, is now able to work. Oftentimes people will feel like, gosh, they've just lost that sense of humor. They've just lost that sense of spontaneity and fun. And really they haven't, but what you're seeing is you're seeing that person's whole brain working. And so you may see a decrease in that. But if it's the right medication, it's not going to feel like you've all of a sudden gone from a happy child to a somber, zombie. So a couple things. One is to understand what's happening in the brain when we take medications, is that it's giving us now the opportunity for that part of the brain that we want to be able to plan and hold our attention and maybe wait to say something if we don't want to. And that may look like it's a personality change. If it changes really dramatically, like I said, if it goes from a happy child to a somber child, I would talk with the doctor about that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And especially if the student is worried, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So thank you so much. It's been so helpful, so practical. There are just so many questions here that we could go on for another hour. So maybe we'll have another session if you're free down the road. So,
I love that.
Thanks, everybody, for
all right. Thanks, everyone.
Logging in today. Thanks, all of you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
For more Attitude podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.